Alright guys, we need to cover the last bit of Reconstruction here, so it shouldn't take too terribly long. We just talk about the end of Reconstruction and the beginning of the Jim Crow South. So, as we should know up until this point, Reconstruction admits all of the former Confederate states into the Union. We also have the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, whose main goal is to ensure that blacks have equal rights and equality in the South, both at the state and at the federal level. But we need to keep in mind that Reconstruction is going to be a slow and difficult process, and eventually Democrats in the South are going to start to take back control of the southern states. And one way in which they do that, which we've talked about already, are these things called black codes. So more and more of these black codes, which are discriminatory laws, 100%, they limit blacks within the South, what it is they can and cannot do, how it is they participate in government, what it is they can do in terms of avoiding a jail sentence and all that. So what these black codes do is to make sure that black men and women in the South are limited in terms of what it is they can do. Most of the time, these are to stop them from participating in government and also to keep them from being able to get any sort of skilled jobs within the South. If they have to compete against a white worker because of the black codes and the way that they're limited, that white worker is most of the time going to get that job over a black worker. Also, one way in which black codes limit black Americans in the South as well is to ensure that they would serve some sort of jail sentence for very small, very minute crimes or non-existent crimes in general. And this is actually one way a lot of black men are forced back into slavery through the limitation of their rights and ensuring that these people are imprisoned. So it's not necessarily slavery by name to punish black men for a crime. However, it is slavery in everything but name. They could serve a jail sentence for anything as small as not paying back a debt, which a lot of debt was accrued by black Americans at this point in time because they didn't have any money or any sort of means to pay for certain things. So a lot of debt was accrued, and a lot of people did serve jail sentences for these very small, very, in retrospect, unimportant crimes and discriminatory crimes, definitely. In addition, the American Supreme Court is actually going to start ruling against civil rights laws that are designed to protect African Americans in the South as well. A list of some of the court cases here. Essentially what these are saying is that civil rights is a state-based issue, that the federal government doesn't have any sort of say on what it is you as an individual American, what your civil rights are. So these court cases here are going to limit the ability of the 14th and 15th Amendment to do its job and also limit what it is the federal government can do in terms of granting civil rights to African Americans in the South. Additionally, what else limits the ability of blacks to further themselves in the South? Well, the Ku Klux Klan arrives around this time period, and their main goal from their inception is going to be to limit the ability of blacks to vote and also to challenge the idea that blacks are equal within the South. Their main goal is to push the idea of white supremacy, that whites are going to be better than blacks in every way, shape, and form. And you could see that resulting in a lot of the violence that is going to occur during this time period as well. Lynching, or the hanging of innocent black men, is going to be very rampant during this time period. You're going to see lots and lots of innocent black men that are going to be lynched for nothing or very minute, very unimportant reasons. So, for instance, if a black man was just accused of showing interest or looking at or whistling at a white woman, they could face lynching from the community. And granted, the Ku Klux Klan is a community movement, and later on in U.S. history you'll actually see it become a more politicized movement as well. But during this time period, it's the community that kind of rallies around the Klan and pushes for the limitation of blacks and the violent attacking and even murder of blacks in the South as well. So with this, the Democratic Party is going to start to take over the state governments again. Black codes and the KKK are limiting the ability for blacks to vote in the South. And also federal troops, those federal troops that were put in the South thanks to radical Republican Reconstruction, are going to see that they're having a really difficult time protecting the rights of blacks as the Democrats start to take control. So here's just a little graph that shows you the red line being the Republicans that are in the South Carolina House of Representatives, a southern state. In 1868, it's going to have its peak amount of Republicans that are going to be in the House, but as you see, as we move further along, all the way up into the later portion of the 1870s, Republicans are all but not present, and once again, the Democrats have taken total control or majority control of the House of Representatives in South Carolina. So how are African Americans in the South responding to this? What's happening with them, with the attacks, with the limitation of their rights in the later portion of Reconstruction? Well, most of these people are ex-slaves. And because of that, they're not highly educated, and they don't really have any sort of skill set that they can apply to work that's being created in the South. So a lot of them are going to end up returning to the plantation work that they're familiar with, because it's a job that they've done their entire lives, and it's something they know how to do. And so because of this, a lot of white plantation owners in the South are going to take advantage of this workforce by doing this thing called sharecropping, which is also known as tenant farming. And so what that essentially is a white landowner would rent out bits of land to black workers. And so as a result of this, the black workers not having any sort of money that they can use to pay for that rent would give the white landowner anywhere from a half to a quarter, just a certain portion of the crop that they would be harvesting. But this ends up working against the black landowner, because you would think, okay, cool, they have some land that they can work, they can rent it out, they can make a name for themselves, they can start to gain some money and some profit, eventually get out of debt. But that's not actually the way that it ended up working out, because not only did they need the land, but they also needed the tools, the seeds, all the goods that needed to be used to work that land. Well, where else would they get it except for the landowner? So what would end up happening is they would rent out that land to a black worker. They would also rent out the tools, they would also rent out the seeds and all the other goods, and eventually that black worker would be in such incredible amount of debt that they would not be able to pay off that debt. And so year after year after year, that debt would accrue higher and higher and higher. So eventually they would be so stuck and so deep into debt that they would be stuck working that land to work that debt off, in which case they never would. So that's sharecropping or tenant farming, and it's a way for white landowners to, in a way, legally keep these black men and women working for them and stuck on that same plantation. So by the mid-1870s, the Democratic Party is going to be back in power in the southern states, and the only thing really protecting those blacks in the South are going to be federal troops. But that eventually is going to end with the Compromise of 1877. So you have a Democrat, Tilden versus Rutherford B. Hayes, and Rutherford B. Hayes is not going to win a majority of the electoral vote, neither is Tilden. So the Republicans, Democrats at Congress end up coming to a compromise to end this election process so that Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican, is going to win. So the Democrats agree, the Democrats that are in the House agree to vote for Hayes as president. However, the Republicans need to remove any sort of military presence that exists in the South. And keep in mind, the military in the South is really the only thing that's protecting the blacks in the South at this point in time. So the compromise is going to end up passing, and so when Rutherford B. Hayes becomes president, the federal troops are going to be removed, and so in 1877, Reconstruction is officially going to end. So when Reconstruction is over in 1877, that's where you start to see the Jim Crow era, which is going to last almost all the way into the 1960s. So Jim Crow, those are laws that are on the books, state-based laws within southern states that restrict blacks from voting. They enforce poll tax, they enforce literacy tests, and also it segregates blacks and whites in the South. A picture right here showing the white water fountain, which obviously is much nicer as opposed to the black water fountain. And this is just one way of many that blacks in the South were segregated. Not only would it be public facilities, but it would also be things like schools. Certain public services would be limited to whites only, and blacks would have their own. And obviously, and this picture just does a really nice job of showing it, blacks were given less than. They were given the worst of these two halves. They went to worse schools. They were less educated. So that's Jim Crow in the South, which in America too is kind of elaborated on a lot more. But that's it for Reconstruction, guys. We're all done.